Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Enhance International's third in a series of webinars on redesigning the chain, modeling the strategic implications of tariffs, onshoring, and restructuring. So with us today, we have Chris White and Greg Schlegel, and our team of us that have done many webinars. We appreciate that you have come to attend today's webinar, and we hope that your family are happy and safe and healthy. This is the third of the series of webinars. Our first two webinars focused on first the impact of supply chain policy management. You can find those on the EIG website, as well as the physics of supply chains. Next webinar will be on Beyond the Dashboard, stress testing supply chains and structurally modeling add-ons. And we'll wrap it up with our fifth webinar on mapping the terrain. So please keep those in mind, those dates in mind. It'd be great to have you join us. So again, please feel free to enter into the chat and poll EV throughout the webinar, and we welcome comments at any time. With that, we'll get straight to the deliverables. The first deliverable is key variables to consider for short and long-term planning in a tariff world. And then we'll look to share some insights on the key trade-offs to guide strategic and tactical planning. And then we'll demonstrate the differentiated value of structural modeling versus network modeling. Chris will do that. And then fourth, we'll share in the recommendations to navigate the new normal tariffed world. And fifth, but not least, we'll look at the value of trust in this new world, because as the world gets more complex and there's more trade-offs, trust becomes a bigger factor. With that, we're going to go right into it with Greg introducing himself in the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. Greg?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks a lot, Jim. Pleasure to be here with you today to talk about our passion. This is who we are and what we do at the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. We're 33 companies, about 1,700 supply chain risk professionals around the globe. We more or less operate in three pillars. You can see them on the right: education, consulting, and software as a service associated with supply chain risk management. On the left, we have a couple of offerings. We have two certificate courses online, self-paced. You can receive a certificate. The two courses are geared around manufacturing, and the other is geared around public health care for logisticians. We also have an online supply chain management readiness assessment where we evaluate a company's supply chain process maturity. That tier one is free. You can visit our website and you can assess your own supply chain process maturity on your own. It's free. We have another one which is more pure risk. We call that the 90-day action plan tool, but it evaluates your risk maturity, your risk appetite, and your risk culture using questions of discovery and AI ML algorithms. So we have one of three tools for free, and essentially you can visit us on our website and you can go through and get a sense of where you are from a maturity point of view. We do coaching, consulting, as we mentioned, and we have a host of platform solutions that will do the heavy lifting for you when you are ready to go into supply chain risk and resiliency in a big way. That's who we are. I'll turn it over to Chris.
Hey, thanks, Greg. So my company, scmBLOX, Supply Chain Management Blocks, it's a structural supply chain modeling tool. You'll actually see it in action. You'll see some of the results from it later on, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but it's a long-term strategic what-if analysis and planning tool for supply chains, where it looks at the entire supply chain as a system and sees how different companies and organizations and entities in that system act, react, and adjust over time, and what that means to the full supply chain. So different from network analyses that tend to be more static of here's a structure and let's understand what that is versus another structure. This actually shows you how to move from one structure to another and what those implications are. But you'll see more of that later, so I won't spend. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Chris. And Enhance International Group, we're a group of 80 partners covering consulting, SaaS solutions, and SaaS and group providers. And we focus on strategy to execution following the people, process, data, technology roadmap. And of course, today we're focusing on supply chain risk and resiliency and linking simulation to decisions. And again, we're focused on creating that overall loop. With that, I think we just get started on the agenda and for redesigning the chain, modeling the strategic implications of tariffs, onshoring, and restructuring. Our first agenda item will be focusing on the strategic framing of a new normal tariffed world. We've created a VUCA world of tariff world, so we got to figure out how to navigate it. What are those current challenges and approaches to mitigate the impact of tariffs? We'll talk about really what people are doing today. And then Chris will show you how structural modeling can help in this and bring it to life and creating really some very compelling insights that you'll see. And then we'll talk about redesigning for resilience and reviewing some alternative solutions and trade-offs. And then we'll look at trust as a catalyst for resiliency, because again, without trust, it doesn't matter. Nothing will pass through. And of course, we'll get in the end with some case study. These case studies are from what the best-in-class providers are doing out there in the world for your reference. So we'll get started with Greg here on the tariff rates. Go, Greg.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. We thought we'd start you off with kind of a gut check on tariffs. This is as of August of this year, so pretty recent. Very fluid. The data is from Visual Capitalists. They're friends of the consortium. They share data with us. The level of tariffs legend is at the top on the x-axis from 10% to 50%, color-coded. A little over 70 countries are identified at the bottom left, so you can take a look at that. The net is, folks, it's a very fluid situation. Every day it changes. Time will tell, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you with some insights and direction on navigating this VUCA world of tariffs. So with that, we'll move into something a little bit different at the outset. And that is, we want to talk just real quickly about threads, about trust discussions at Davos. I think everyone on the call knows about Davos. Every year, the delegates go over to Switzerland. They sit down. They talk about the classic issues of the globe. That's all good. But they actually talk about risk and produce a risk report. So one thread that was evident was a nervous optimism. And this comes from a friend of the consortium who goes every year and scribes out what the threads and sentiment is, and he shares that with us. So one comment he had was, the folks in the hallways and in Davos, the folks rarely have seen attendees with so many divergent outlooks for the future. This is, World Economic Forum talking. So essentially, a more interesting theme that this gentleman felt in private conversations was trust. All right. it seemed to him in private conversations in the hallways, nobody overtly talked about trust in presentations, but in the hallways and at the restaurants, trust in institutions and in the corporate world, it seemed to him like trust in leadership appears to be at an all-time low in the last 50 years. Very, very disturbing and concerning to all of us. All right. And then essentially, what did they talk about? They always talk about the classic direction: economics, tariffs, AI everywhere. Those are the classics. But what we thought was really interesting was his comments about the underlining current of a lack of trust between institutions and corporate companies, or countries, I should say. So with that, we'll go back to tariffs and we'll share this with you. The surge of cargo into America's busiest container and handler complex, which is Los Angeles and Long Beach. This goes through 25 through August. We'll talk more about trust in a minute, but here's an update profile of TEUs imported into LA and Long Beach on the west coast of the US as of the end of August. And the executive director of the Port of LA, Gene Sirocco, said this about the end of August. He more or less said he expects cargo volumes to fall off in September and October. Why? Because retailers have brought in most of their year-end merchandise to do what? To get ahead of the tariffs. So we wanted to share a couple of data points with you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. Well, we'll just get on to the next section. Current challenges. What are those, and approaches to mitigate the impacts of tariffs? And we'll get right back to you, Greg, and he'll give you an outline of what tariffs are.
You bet. We took this from Supply Chain Brain, good friend of the consortium, Bob Bowman. He's a senior editor. He put out an article in Supply Chain Brain magazine back in April of 2025. And so it kind of a sobering thread regarding tariffs for apparel. You know, we put down a little blurb on the left. How does a tariff work? You guys can see that if it costs $4 in America, you put a 25% tariff on someone like the British who's sending it over. It's gonna equal $5. So there you go, the price increase. What he did is he did a deep dive through interviews talking about retail apparel and the impacts of tariffs. And he more or less said, you know, at 2023, 2 years ago, 7 countries accounted for about 66% of all US apparel imports. You can see the countries, and then you can go back and take a look at the tariffs as of August. But he was talking about at the end of this quote unquote, remember 90-day pause, these countries would be subject to an average tariff of about 46%. Then he went on to talk about the impact. One of the big impacts would be threatening the wider workforce, which are women. Women represent 70% of the garment industry workers. All right. So he even dug deeper and said, think of this. Moving production back to the US will take years, and the workforce in the US will have to be paid on paper 10 to 20 times higher than in Southeast Asia. So the net was a gal, Alice James of AJG Fashion Consulting, who he was talking with, estimated that, okay, a shirt that costs $14 US made to make in China with a current, as of April, a current 125% tariff would cost us about 23 US dollars. So pretty impactful on just one particular industry. We wanted to share that with you, and I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. Just a note, if the questions in the chat will be covered a little bit later in the webinar. We're not ignoring them, and Chris will cover them when he starts. With that, I just want to go over this tariff mitigation matrix that we put together. And on the y-axis, you have impact from low to high. And across the top, you have low and complexity and high complexity types of things that you can do to mitigate tariffs. And the green balls are what you can do today. The blue are what you can do in 3 to 18 months. And the purple ones are going out a little bit further after 18 months. So what can we do? And what are people doing right now? Of course, these immediate ones here that we see, invoice and classification audit, that's classic, which is kind of funny, but maybe not funny. But these are what you should be doing all the time. So that's a cleanup that should be done. The duty drawback programs, of course, those are the things that you should be doing anyways, but they may help you making sure you're classified correctly with your goods, because those classifications are apt to change, and you got to be on top of that because you certainly don't want to be fined for that. A little bit low impact is invoice splitting to reduce dutiable base. That's like, oh, we might be able to get something out of that and squeeze it out. Well, it might work. It may not work. You got to watch yourself for that. And then as far as, trying to do tariff re-engineering with minor product redesign, that's probably very high complex, but yet very low impact. High complexity, but high impact, nearshoring and friendshoring. That's what we'll get into today, is like, should we stay or should we go? And you'll be hearing that theme quite a bit here in the next few minutes. And then, of course, capacity-driven pricing models on how much volume do you need in order to justify this. So those are some short-term types of things that you can be doing. Also, supplier diversification to FTA countries, and those FTA countries are countries like Singapore and so forth, and those countries are in Australia, but those countries are no longer the what they used to be. So I don't even know if FTA countries are real anymore with these tariffs. So there are different things that we thought were low complex and we think is complex, not complex today. This is a moving target every day on this grid, but these are the things that we see people doing and trying to get ahead of the tariffs. So is there a question in the chat? Okay. All good?
Yeah, it
So,
looks like it's all good.
all right. So we kind of broke this down with Chris, Greg, and I. We were talking, there's really 3 stages of shifting the burden of that tariff cost transfer. There's that initial impact of, your launch phase, which is where we're at today, is where the offshore providers are really absorbing this, the costs. The immediate impact is when now this is trying to be negotiated within the adjustment phase. And now we negotiate are we going to split this 50-50? How are we going to do it? Some suppliers are going to lowball and say, we're going to take it on, which is going to make sure that the other suppliers don't raise their prices. And we'll be playing this renegotiation type of transfer of the cost of that tariff that they have to pass on, and then you get into that long-term impact. And of course, this is all traded off with onshoring versus moving to another source. So this is really the problem statement that we have as Greg, Chris, and I sat there and said, okay, now Chris, what can you do? What can you do to model this? So that was the problem statement around where we started. And at the end of the day, we all know that there's really no structural way to avoid the tariffs. I mean, they're going to happen, and it's a tax, and somebody's got to pay for it. So either we can make it cheaper in the U.S. than what the tariff amount, is, and the only question is going to be about the timing and the velocity of that transfer of that cost. So we kind of came down, we started reminiscing about the Clash back in 1982 for the old fogies there that listened to the Clash. But it comes down to what are the triggers to make you stay or go? And we see a few ideas there. Cost benefit, of course, countries with different tariff rates, location are some of the things. So if you can't get to the poll EV, feel free to enter your comments in the chat. With that, Greg or Chris, any comments on this?
Yeah, this is very interesting. And what's tough about this, we're going to go through an example in a little bit, but it's a very simplified example. This can get very, very, very complex quickly. And you can tell by just some of the things, inventory, the cost, what are the benefits? Well, what do we mean by benefits? And so there's a lot to unpack here, but we'll try to do it in just a little bit.
So, Greg, any comments here?
No, I would say we move forward.
All right. So cost is always the main thing. Who's going to own that cost? Where's that burden of that cost go? So with that, we're going to go to the structurally modeling in action, and Chris is going to take us through this.
Fantastic. And if y'all have seen any of these other webinars, we like to start off with this sort of perfect storm Venn diagram of where we're trying to answer some problems. They are strategic, the upper circle, they're strategic in nature. And we've got this, what we call the strategic risk paradox, where we spend very little time and money on issues that could have a huge financial impact to our companies. And I think the number is something like we spend 4% of our time on issues that could have an 80% or greater than 80% impact on the financial or survivability of the company, whereas we spend almost half our time on these operational issues, which really in the bigger scheme don't have as much of a financial impact. So you've got that element. You've got this perspective in the lower left there, the strategic, tactical, operational, the different levels of where should we be paying attention. So you got this risk paradox where we're not doing enough in the strategic domain, enough analysis, and then you've got this perspective of there's many different timeframes. And then the last is simulation, and we use a specific type called structural modeling that you'll see in action here. And if you've seen any of the other webinars, that's what we've got. But in the end, they all kind of collapse in this one middle point that says, hey, in this VUCA world, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, you got to be very proactive. These things take time. You can't snap your fingers and have stuff in place already. These things take time to put in place. And so you have to be proactive to be able to do everything before you need it. So that's what we'll look into. And going back to Jim's, question, the big question is, when we're looking at tariffs, what's the minimum tariff rate difference that would make me, a company, want to redesign my supply chain? Because there's a lot of work in that. And let's take some simple extreme. If a tariff is 1%, we'll eat that, whatever, or even if it gets passed to the customer, not that big of a deal. We'll leave everything. But if a tariff is 1,000%, now we definitely need to change things. And so where are we in between, and what's that break-even point? Where's the inflection point or the tipping point where we need to change? So that's what we're going to try to address here. Now, if you've seen our other webinars, we're going to set it up. We're using the same model we've done in all the other ones just to be consistent. So it's a very simplified model where on the bottom we have a picture of what's happening within a company. Every company is producing something. They receive some raw material. They're trying to hold 4 weeks of inventory. They then produce. They have finished goods inventory. They're trying to hold 4 weeks of finished goods inventory, and then they deliver. And we're steady state of 100 orders a week. So everyone's receiving, producing, and delivering 100 orders a week in steady state, and they're holding 400 units in raw material and finished goods. The scope of this is we just assume this is one product, one SKU within a larger portfolio, so it doesn't necessarily shut the company down just because it's not operating or it's losing money. So it's just one SKU, and there's no waste. Everything, we're not making 95% with 5% scrap. Everything is good. And we sort of have this moderate response rate built in where if I've got to adjust my inventory levels, I'm not going to do that super quickly. I'm not going to be aggressive where I risk overshooting too much, but I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to take too long of a time where I miss my opportunity. So we're trying to have this sort of moderate reaction rate. And so that's kind of the base model. Now we've got some simplifying assumptions when it comes to the tariffs that go along with this. So the slide before said structurally, the cost ends up getting passed on to the consumer. So the first simplifying assumption that we have is that 100% of the tariff is getting passed on to the customer, just for simplicity. Obviously, there could be different ones, but we've got to somehow bound this to be able to talk about it in a few minutes. Takes a lot of time to stand up a new supplier, but a minimum of 6 months. So we're just going to start there. Anything longer than 6 months just makes all this more difficult and worse. So we're kind of picking the easiest situation. 6 months is rather fast and aggressive. We're going to assume a linear elasticity of demand, of customer demand when prices change. So if price increases by 10%, we're going to say that customer demand drops by 10%. So just for simplicity, it's linear. Usually that's a nonlinear relationship, but we're not going to get into all that. So very, very simple. The cost of standing up a new supplier is not included because for several reasons. First of all, it's the same across all these scenarios, so it just lowers the bar the exact same amount. But second, sometimes that's a different pot of money or a different way to handle it. And so it is on the books in a different way. And so it's not really part of this. So we're really mainly looking at operationally what happens. And we're only considering two major factors. The percent of tariff difference. So, again, this is difference. It's not just a tariff. It's a difference between two countries or two locations. So we're going to see different percentages. And then the increase or decrease in transit times, because as I'm moving, I'm either perhaps onshoring, bringing it closer, bringing the supplies closer so that transit time has decreased, or I'm moving it perhaps to a country even further away where it actually increases. So we're doing a lot of setup here so that we can get into the modeling and get to kind of the punchline at the end, which is what is that break even for the tariffs? So we've showed you before these resilience metrics, and we're going to keep these in mind also. This is an example of some adjustments. And this, again, where structural modeling differs than network modeling, where we can actually show these dynamic changes over time with structural models, because things take months, if not years, at this strategic level to implement and play out. But amplitude, if I look at an inventory level, raw material, finished goods, amplitude is kind of my highest point minus my lowest point. What's my biggest swing there? Time to recover. When do I start seeing some changes, and when do I finally get close to back to a new normal, whatever that is, a new level of stability? And then there's these cycles or swings where it's basically an up-down pattern. And so we're showing those 1, 2. This has 3 cycles or swings in it, where it's an up-down combination, because that's volatility, and that's volatility we're introducing ourselves. So I want to keep those metrics in mind because you're going to see those. Now, the basic model, and there was the question from Rob in the chat about digital twin, and this is a digital twin. And with digital twins, there's different versions where some may be used to tell me what my inventory is tomorrow, so I need real-time information, and so it's a very connected digital twin. But there are others like this that are more strategic, and the more strategic they are, they can be disconnected in terms of actually needing a data source and getting fed live data, because they're over a longer period of time. That's less important. So this is a version of a digital twin. It's just a disconnected digital twin. But this is how we have it set up. And if you've seen these other webinars, again, this is building on what we've done before, so all that's the same. We've got an OEM, and you can see there this flow of 100 going through, and then 400 in raw material and finished goods. We talked about that. And then I've got this supplier that I'm getting from. So they look the same. Everybody's kind of operating the same. So when we now go implement this change, what we're looking at is we're going to shift to a second supplier doing the exact same stuff. Again, same model, just to keep all that consistent. The behavior is consistent under the same conditions and situations. But we're going to shift over, and so this is a 6-month shift. Takes a while for that supplier to get up and going, but this is the basic model that we're looking at. So now what I want to do is walk through an example chart that will come out. I know it's crazy, so let's walk through this a little bit. And again, it's to give you a feeling for what's happening so that we can quickly move to the punchline, the conclusion at the end. So when this tariff is introduced, I've got three variables that we're tracking here. And this is all at the OEM. We could do this for all the suppliers, but it's me. I'm being very selfish here. I'm looking at me, the OEM. Raw material is the blue line, the dashed red line is finished goods, and the dotted green line is deliveries. And so you'll see that finished goods and raw materials start at 400. The tariff comes in and you'll see the finished goods drop because if you look at deliveries down at the bottom, the dotted green line, they drop from 100 down because demand changed. My price went up, and so my demand has changed. So I'm delivering less, which means I need less finished goods. And just by that change of a dip in demand, I'm already starting to adjust. Suddenly I have extra raw material because I need less for finished goods. I'm delivering less. And so it kicks off this oscillation. Then we've got this 6 month period where we're bringing on a new supplier, and you see raw material, finished goods. This is around the week 50, 57 here at the bottom. They dip to their lowest point. Obviously, if it took longer than 6 months, these could flatline and I could have zero production for a while making that shift if I want to just completely move to a new supplier. So that's why we picked 6 months also, as it kind of takes it low, but it doesn't kill it. And now we're coming back, though that new supplier has a huge order backlog, so they're going to overshoot for a while, and there's a little bit of oscillation, and you may not be able to see it, but there's a cone here. We're going to put some lines on there that is sort of shrinking, and then all of a sudden it synchronizes, and it suddenly gets attenuated really, really quickly there at the end, where suddenly everything lines up and I'm delivering at the right time, and all of a sudden that kind of evaporates quickly. But this is what the dynamics you're going to see in every single chart. We're going to show some more, but just wanted you to get a feel for that, and it just happens more or less in different situations. So now when we layer on there the different metrics that we're looking at, those resilience ones, you see on the left and the right, I'm showing the amplitudes of finished goods and raw material. 84%, that's a pretty big one, and it's all negative with finished goods. It drops. The raw material you see drops, but then overshoots, and so it's a high one at 176%. We have one finished goods cycle, but we've got 7 raw material cycles. So finished goods doesn't suffer much, but internally, we're churning a lot with our 7 raw material cycles there. And time to recover is 145 weeks. 145 weeks. I want you to hear that, because we do not snap our fingers and this happens immediately. When we are talking about changing and bringing on new suppliers and shifting from one to the other, that takes a while. We've even kept it short at 6 months, but this ripple effect of now once the new one's on and we're still making these adjustments and overshoot for a while and undershoot for a while, that's almost 3 years right there, 145 weeks for that to finally settle down to where we're okay. So anything happening in there is not the economy, it's nothing. It's us creating internal churn ourselves as a result of that change. Okay, so now I'm going to start.
We have a question.
Oh, do we? Sorry.
Yeah, from Mark, he says the variation with a new supplier looks too large. What drives this?
So it drives, what you have is this situation where you're out of sync because of delays in the, again, there's a transit time and there's adjustment times of inventory. We're being moderate. We're not trying to be too aggressive with our ordering and things like that. So there's this, we're ordering from the supplier, new supplier, and that supplier is building capacity and isn't delivering exactly what we need yet. But then they try to really deliver a lot, so they over-deliver. Well, because they've over-delivered, we say, whoa, stop. If we were to trace our orders here, we would see that we as the OEM cut back on our orders. And so they then, of course, dip, and we're like, no, wait, we need more. And so they're just kind of off a little bit where we're ordering and undershooting. If you've ever played the beer game, this is what happens in the beer game. It's your typical bullwhip. There are delays in the system that cause these to be out of sync. They finally sync up and we settle down. So that's the short answer to that.
And I can testify during COVID, what happened was all the warehouse was overflowing with raw material. We couldn't put it. We didn't have any place to put it. Finished goods had gone down. And then all of a sudden, finished goods went up, but it took many, many cycles, just like this shows here. This is exactly what happened in that warehouse. This is very, very typical of what happens in MOQs, and you're shipping short because you don't really have everything. So this is fairly typical from what I've seen. And like you said, beer game on steroids shows this every time.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
And structural modeling is not going to tell you exactly it's 273 at some point in time, but you want to see the magnitude, kind of the relative magnitude of these cycles. So now I'm going to build a chart, and I'm going to kind of go through this quickly because I want us to get to the chart. And we're going to look at, in this chart that you're about to see, we're going to show those graphs. You just saw one example, but for all 16 of our scenarios, because we have two factors that each have four different values. And so 4 times 4 is 16. So you're going to see 16 charts. Their tariff rate difference, these are the values we're looking at: 25%, 50, 75, 100. There you go. And so that's going down. Going across is our transit time change. So you'll see a 0 right there, and underneath it says 2 weeks. That's our current transit time. We're going to allow for a -1, meaning I can decrease to a week by onshoring, but we're also going to have a +1 and a +2, meaning I'm going further away. Those countries that have lower tariffs, we saw that we don't do a lot of, like even in the apparel industry, we don't do a lot here. So I don't have the choice of suddenly onshoring. I may have to move to another country that's further away. So we're showing that 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. So we're starting at 2, -1, +1, +2. So that's going across the top. These are all those scenarios. So you'll see it's roughly the same dynamics, just exaggerated in some situations. And so what I want to do is highlight kind of what's happening. As the transit time increases, the raw material and finished good amplitudes increase. So that's that resilience or lack of resilience. Cycles increase, so we're getting volatile, and their time to recover increases as well. I want to come back after we've now talked about those general impacts. I want to bring this slide back up and sort of highlight the 4 corners of this. It sounds like the Villanova defense back in college basketball. Weren't they the ones who did the 4 corners? Or was that North Carolina? I can't remember. Anyway, but these kind of show the minimums and the maximum, sort of the least beneficial and the most beneficial. And the worst case that you can have is in the upper right that we have highlighted red, where there's a very small tariff difference, but you're adding a lot of volatility due to a longer transit time. And so it's definitely not worth it there. But the better situation is this lower left. And now we're proving what we all sort of want to do, which is bring it closer, whether that's truly into the United States or that's just on nearshoring or friendshoring, closer so that transit time is shorter. But it's a big tariff, and makes it worth the while. That's why we're avoiding it. So this is just kind of highlighting those 4, and we'll pick on those 4 in a little bit. So now I want to build a new chart, but I want to set this up first. It's the exact same 16 scenarios, but the axes are slightly different. We've switched them now. So now on the horizontal on the bottom is the tariff rate difference going from low to high. And now the transit time is going from low to high on the y-axis. And so now I want to put some numbers for break-even amounts. These are percentage comparisons to the baseline if we change nothing, the baseline profit that a company is making over this period of time. Green means we're making money. The bigger the bubble, the more money we're making. White means we're not. With red numbers means we're losing money. And so, and you see the bigger bubbles are the ones that we are losing the most money. And so you see those same 4 corners. We'll highlight those 4 to kind of let you know kind of the best, worst situation where, again, it's all 4 corners, but now they're kind of switched. So the best situation is this lower right. We'll put a circle around that here, where it's the lower right. And we've got the most profit because we're shortening our transit time, and we are also, we're shifting from a very, very large tariff. But you can see there's kind of on the left side are white and white bubbles with red numbers, and on the right side are green. So we can kind of see even here a break-even line, but let's actually draw a break-even line for you and show you what that looks like. And what's interesting, what this means is in the best possible situation, in that the lower left part of that line, the best possible situation is that we've shortened the time, we've gotten closer, but even in that situation, The way we have this constructed, given, of course, it's based on the price and all the stuff we're using in the model and how much we're doing, but there's a 44% minimum tariff rate difference that I makes it worth my while to make that change. If it's less than 44%, I actually do better staying there because it's not worth the change. It becomes worth the change once it's greater than at least or greater than 44%. But now let's trace that line because maybe we're not in that situation. So if we trace that line, what we see is, well, if I happen to have, I've got no transit time improvement, it's a country or location that's about the same distance, 50% becomes that break even, or this is rounding off it, but somewhere around 50%. And then it gets longer, it becomes 56% and then 62. So if I've got to go somewhere further than to some other country further, I need a higher tariff rate to make that worthwhile. So this is just a very, very interesting chart. And not so much that this is saying this applies to everybody, but the concept is there that now with structural modeling, we can actually understand where we truly break even with our situation. Again, very simplified, only two factors being considered. There's a lot more to do to consider here. And I see some questions. I'm on my phone, unfortunately, so I can't quite see some of those.
When considering ocean freight, transit times changes can be much larger than 1 week.
They can, absolutely. So again, this is just picking very simple examples and limiting us to only 16 simulation runs. If we wanted to pick 1 week, 1.5 weeks, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, or even do it by days, you could run hundreds of simulations, get a much more refined graph than this. Absolutely. So this is just a notional situation, but it's to show that you can do that. And if we start to kind of conclude on this.
Well, one more question here.
Oh, okay. I didn't see.
Does this mean low tariffs means you can't break even? Does this mean low tariffs means you can't break even?
That is correct. Giving the operational impact that it has in the volatility and the changes, because when we have too much inventory, you saw those oscillations of raw material inventory. And when that's high and we're paying for a lot of material, we've over ordered, our suppliers sent us too much. We've got too much. Our profit goes down. So our profit is changing through that whole time. And we're seeing these massive changes in profit being, we're doing well, we're not doing well, we're doing well. So, but over this time period, and again, you could change your time period, but over this time period, the 4-year time period that we used in this simulation, 44% within the bounds of this simulation. If it's not at least 44%, none of these, doesn't matter where you move it, it's not beneficial in the end. So this truly is a break even of showing you over this time period that this is what holds to be true. So now let's just kind of summarize what we've learned here. And the first thing that we learned is that changes in the transit time have a huge impact on the decision to redesign your supply chain because it introduces volatility. There's higher amplitudes that you have to deal with. When you have these oscillations, it's a longer time to recover. You essentially have created this bullwhip effect, and this impacts everyone, and obviously it impacts you in the supply chain. But the second big point is to now know we can actually calculate some minimum tariff rate differences that warrant or make it worthwhile, makes the juice worth the squeeze of redesigning our supply chain. Now, it's not, so the key thing is tariff rate is not the only variable to look at. Operationally, there are all these other considerations to make to see if it's worthwhile. We only picked a couple, but this opens the door to show what's possible. So thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Jim.
Yeah, so this is open discussion. If there's what triggers to make you stay or go, of course, we see cost is the highest one because a lot of people putting cost in. And we see inventory levels, of course, and buffer inventories, demand patterns, location, because we were talking about, well, are you going to move from Asia to Europe or Africa to South America or Mexico? All these are why we chose the 1 week, 2, 3 week comparisons. Anything to add, Chris?
I see that Dave asked a question about dual source. So keep in mind, this is a really simple scenario for doing this. Does dual source have an impact? Absolutely, it has an impact. And we could model that. In fact, one of our earlier scenarios, we showed the benefit of dual sourcing and being able to switch and have suppliers already brought on. So that's essentially dual sourcing is bringing another supplier on earlier than you actually need them, and giving yourself some options along the way in case either one of them falters. So yeah, obviously that would help. Now, the extent to which it would help depends on the situation, but it could clearly and easily be incorporated into the model. So again, this was just to keep it simple so that we didn't have 50 variables and all these iterations to consider that confuses it. We tried to just keep it really
Yeah, this model we kept simple, and then Sarah's asking about that is time the only factor with changing suppliers. So of course, there's many other factors, Sarah. Yeah. And in our previous webinar, I think we modeled actually 4 or 5 factors and ran it through the model. This particular model, we decided just to make it simple because tariffs is complicated all in itself. But yes, the power of this is you can model anything you want. If you want 7, 9, 10 factors in your model, Chris can model that. This webinar is just to show what can be done and the art of the possible. Anything else to add, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. Like for instance, quality isn't put in there right now. It just assumes if everything's 100% quality, and as I switch suppliers, it's equal quality. Obviously, yeah, all these things could definitely have an impact, and it's just a more complicated model that we just thought might be a little too much for the webinar. But please come talk to us afterwards. All this stuff that's being brought up could definitely be added and considered in the evaluation.
So with that, if my computer will cooperate, we'll go on to the next section, redesigning for resilience. And we'll let Greg do the moral of the story here. Greg?
Yeah, you bet. The moral of our story is this: using structural simulation, which remember is really relationship based, we can provide some guidance in terms of if, when, and how regarding tariffs. All right. As Chris demonstrated, we can reveal inflection points, we call them, or trigger points over time so that you don't overcommit. And finally, we feel we have a methodology to help you make a tariff decision regarding, do I stay or do I go? And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. So we're going to talk a little bit about trust as a catalyst for resiliency. Greg mentioned it earlier. I'll just build on what Greg said earlier. Just as a rehash here, trust is the invisible infrastructure that accelerates decisions, reduces friction, and amplifies collaboration across every node of a system. So that's our definition of trust that we often use. There's many definitions out there. And as Greg said, from Davos, trust is becoming a bigger and bigger topic these days. And the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium, are coming out with something called the Trust Accelerator or Trust Acceleration Index that we'll be looking at launching in this next 4th quarter. And it's all about perspective. So we have all these relationships from the originator to your business functions, your corporate, your headquarters folks, the business, the people out in the field that are making things happen. And then, of course, we have suppliers and customers up and down the supply chain from raw material to finished goods. And everybody has a differing opinion about or opinion about trust within the network. And one thing that we do know, and we've learned over time here, especially with our study, is that, with trust is speed. So speed is directly correlated with trust. So if you were to have a heat map of what is the trust in your network up and down your supply chain, you could probably get a pretty good pulse of how fast your network is able to respond to the VUCA world. And we look at it from three perspectives: balanced scorecard from the top down, the supply chain management perspective, and from a supply chain risk and resiliency perspective. So with that, I'll turn it over to Greg.
Yep, you bet. We thought we'd dig a little deeper in terms of trust because we think, as Jim mentioned, we think it's going to be the catalyst for the next couple of years within supply chain to improve supply chain and improve the efficacy and performance. So we've been focusing on trust the last couple of months, as Jim mentioned, in a project we're working on with the US government. So we kind of call this anchor in trust, meaning supply chain transparencies could be construed as a tariff shield. So kind of our premise is without trustworthy supply chain transparency, all models are blind. All right. Sorry to say. Transparency in supply chain, we think minimizes the tariff risk. All right. So essentially, again, our premise is supply chain transparency reduces surprises because surprises make tariffs more costly. And finally, kind of our mantra, modeling, structural modeling plus supply chain transparency to us equals actionable game plans. And so we have a few more threads on trust. I won't dig into this one too much other than we kind of tried to put together a phased path to resilience using the models and the trust element. So think of on the left foundations with scmBLOX with some SCM assessment tools that are free, then move into integration, and then move into advanced digital twins and so forth. And this is more or less the crawl, walk, and run, folks. All right, what are some of the strategic payoffs? Improved resilience, essentially being able to handle tariff shocks without your margin loss. Speed, as Jim mentioned, speed is life in supply chain. Trust, meaning alignment with with all the partners in your supply chain, and then improving sustainability or maybe tariff proofing your supply chain over time. So essentially, we think trustworthy transparency in supply chain turns tariffs from shocks maybe to manageable variables. That's kind of our mantra. And we have a quick pictorial view that will show you. I won't get into it in detail, but on the y-axis is your maturity in supply chain and resiliency. And then on the x-axis is start, scale, and then go for the gusto. So we've kind of just given you a roadmap. Start with the scmBLOX like we talked about. As you can see, 60% of the companies are revamping their supply chain. That comes from Deloitte and from Bain recent analysis. So people are doing this. When you attempt to get out of the crawl and move into the walk, you want to scale. We think trust is going to be very, very important. Maybe real-time tariff modeling when you want to go scale, and then future state would look like something we call ChainSight AQ, which is an end-to-end supply chain risk and resiliency tool. So kind of a pictorial view. We'd be more than willing to answer any questions after the session. Feel free to give us a call, send us an email, but we wanted to kind of give you a bit of a roadmap in terms of capping off our discussion. With that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And with that, we'll just, these are case studies that are industry-wide stats commonly found out there, just a recap, so to speak, on what folks are doing. You can see from Bain and Deloitte, these are stats from their publications. 60% of companies are actively revamping supply chains, as Greg mentioned. 77% of consumer goods firms have renegotiated supplier contracts. So there's quite a bit of movement around, big movement in the automotive industry. As we know, the automotive industry kind of leads all industries as far as supply chains are. They have the most robust global supply chains, some of the most robust. 40% of executives expect double-digit increases of inputs due to the tariffs, and 80% of companies have revised or considering revised fiscal financial forecasts because of tariffs. We've heard through our network is that doing a forecast is almost impossible right now with the tariffs. People are just throwing up their hands because they can't even forecast. That's one recurring theme. You see the retailers, 62% of the retailers are optimizing costs through efficiency measures and price adjustments. So people chasing that one we heard about earlier, and 43% of tech companies report minimum concern about losing duty-free treatment for small shipments. But I guess that was before the small parcel. So whatever you assume, you can be sure it's going to be disrupted because we live in a VUCA world, and that's just the way things are being laid out. So what are some of the things the big three consulting firms have been doing to help some of the big companies out there, the Fortune 50, let's say, General Motors, EV batteries, 78% of auto firms onshoring. So here's an onshoring row, and then nearshoring, diversification and automation, and trying to avoid the tariff, being more resilient, speed of market, incentive capture. So this is the summary of some of the things that have been occurring over the last year or two with the VUCA world and now into the tariff world, what different manufacturers are doing, the big manufacturers are doing to try to offset the tariffs. So quite a bit of work underway. So just wanted to give you an indication of what's going on out in the world. With that, I will turn it over to Chris to wrap it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, this chart is a very meaningful and we'll say innovative chart that has not been created yet. This capability of truly being able to say what tariff rate makes it worthwhile to make this move with the long-term consideration of all the operational impacts. And so that's what we're doing here. And we'd love to talk with you, to help you understand in your particular situation. Again, we didn't model everything as the questions, people ask tons of questions. Obviously, we didn't capture everything just to keep it simple for purposes of this webinar, but can absolutely be more complex and be tailored to your situation. But we'd love to help you understand what your inflection and trigger points are in the exact situation you're dealing with. So yeah, this has been really fun to put together. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Chris, for your hard work building up these models and taking on the challenge of putting together to a lot of interesting conversations. But there's a lot of different directions Chris can go in. So please do reach out and to talk with Chris or Greg or I on what can be done. And with that, we're going to close it out. Just the deliverables. If there's any deliverable here that we didn't cover or another deliverable that you're looking for, please do let us know. We're always here to help and very, very open for questions. We love them. We love the challenge, right, Chris? Greg?
Exactly. And with our list of the following webinars, yeah, let's just build on that. There were questions of, what else can be done. And that's what we're going to get into in some of the next couple of webinars is how do you stress test your supply chain? And then how do you actually minimize impacts, or what can you do to minimize? Because some of it you just may have to live with, but how can we minimize that as much as possible? There's typically not an optimal in this situation.
Great. The questions are very aligned, and that's how we set up the webinars. It was a setup. So all
Yeah.
those questions were exactly on our mind, but just a little bit before our time to be able to talk.
Ahead of us already.
Yeah, that's great. Then we know we're on the right track. So
Exactly.
we laid this out correctly. Perfect. With that, Greg, any closing comments?
No, hopefully everyone found it insightful, and we wish everyone the best in this VUCA world because it's rough and ready at the moment.
Chris, closing comments?
Now, it was really fun to put together and to see kind of push the structural modeling to really answer a big question in today's world right now. Is there are all these tariffs, and when do we act and react and do something? And so it was very rewarding to me to walk through an example and see that there's a pathway.
Yeah, and I want to thank everyone for joining, and of course Greg and Chris putting together the webinar. I just think it's very revealing. I think it's a first of a kind analysis, and there's so many different, more interesting analysis that can be done here. And we encourage you to reach out to us and ask us more compelling questions so we can make the next webinar even better. And thank you for your time and have a great day.